Thanks so much again, James, for inviting me. Super excited to just kind of have a chat today and share some of this work that I put together. And yeah, just super excited to be here in general. My name is Michael Mason, and I'm a Canadian designer and director, based mostly from London, sometimes in Stockholm these days. And I work mostly in kind of brand identity, visual narrative, kind of concept-driven systems. But I do quite a bit of work as well within kind of like photo and video art direction. My background is traditionally in graphic design, so I work quite a bit in a lot of the kind of traditional aspects of graphic design, be it like packaging, print, publication, digital, et cetera, et cetera. But to start off with a little bit of a history about myself. So I grew up in Montreal, Canada in the 1990s. This is what Montreal looks like in the winter. And I grew up in the suburbs in like a small neighborhood called DDO, Della Domo. This is a photo of me in front of my childhood home. Very kind of like normal, familiar suburban North American life. Grew up in a home like this on a street with many, many homes that look exactly like this. But it was very kind of, wholesome childhood. Here's me happy on a tricycle. And I was raised by two immigrant parents, both public school teachers in Montreal. My father having grown up in the UK in a small town outside of London called Chingford, which is actually not too far away from where I live now, wildly. And my mother grew up in the Philippines, working as like public school teacher, moving over to Canada in her 20s. But I had like a super familiar kind of path into graphic design. Like I was just like a kid who loved kind of illustrating and making things. I was always kind of like the quiet kid drawing in the corner and all that sort of stuff growing up. And I messaged my mom on WhatsApp earlier this week. I was like, "Hey mom, do you have any drawings from like my childhood?" And she sent me this photo of like this, like I don't know what this is, but I thought it was great, of like this sleepy snail with a backwards cap. But yeah, did a lot of kind of making things when I was a kid. And then by the time that I was in high school, all my friends were kind of like in bands and stuff like this. And I was kind of like one of the token friends who would make all of the gig posters and kind of like work the merch table and make band pins and just kind of be into like making anything, everything that my friends kind of like needed for all their promo and stuff like this. So by the time that I found myself in a situation where I had to kind of decide what I wanted to do after high school, I uh, basically like signed up to a technical program in graphic design at a college called Dawson, back in Montreal, mostly with the ambition of wanting to make like better gig posters and know how to like make better buttons and things like this. I didn't really kind of know what graphic design was beyond that. I didn't like really know what branding was. I had no real kind of like understanding of like design culture, studio culture, design history or anything along those lines. But studied for a few years and like quickly just really immersed myself in the culture of things and fell in love with it as like a trade. And by the time that I graduated, I kind of found myself in this situation where I knew the sort of like studios that I wanted to work with within like the Montreal community of things, and I knew the sort of work that I wanted to be doing at the time, but I didn't really know how to get it. And I knew that with like my student portfolio, like I was getting some like internship offers and things like this, but they were all like not necessarily the places that I wanted to be working with, and didn't really know how to kind of get to the places that I wanted to get to. And I had a couple of friends who were thinking kind of similarly. So we set up like a design collective back out in Montreal. We're all like 20 years old. Sorry, a cat just jumped into the window and is meowing really loud. Can you hear this stray cat?
I can't hear, but you can invite it onto the call if you want to.
Sorry about that. Um, yeah, so we set up this design collective, which was basically like a way of us kind of having a platform to create work and collaborate and kind of like put things out in the world and kind of find ways to like better our craft and prove ourselves to like the local like design community, and just like create the work that we wanted to be getting, to prove that we could do it. So we set up this like little website. We would kind of post things like pretty much like daily, I think, at the time, for months, and started collaborating with kind of like local brands. This was something for like this launch party that we had in collaboration with like WeSC, which is like in downtown Montreal. And we were doing a lot of kind of art direction, like photo, video shoot stuff, extremely DIY. This was kind of early 2010s. I think at this point it was 2000, 2011, 2010, 2011. And like the big designer at the time was Sagmeister. Everyone was like obsessed with kind of handcraft, photo-driven kind of graphic design work. And my favorite designers at the time were like these two craft-driven, photo art direction-driven designers in Montreal called Julien Vallée and Karim Zarifa. And yeah, they both worked a lot with like paper mechanics and stuff like this. So I was making a lot of things with paper mechanics, just kind of inspired by the idea of like building like physical things. So this was like a shoot that we did for TEDx Montreal at the time, doing a lot of like stop frame animation back in the day. Again, this is like first year out of college, but we were just like we got this commission for Pop Montreal, an indie music festival in the city, and they were known for putting up posters all over the city. They had like hundreds of gigs all over the city during this like week-long festival. So we made these kind of stop frame animations of gig posters, and then tore them off one by one and shot them to create like an advert. More paper mechanic stuff, was really into that back in the day. And exploring a lot of like other types of crafts as well. So was still really into kind of hand-drawn illustration, doing typographic work and calligraphy and things along these lines, doing a lot of kind of installations as well. Within my first couple of years, I was really just experimenting a lot, and not really kind of knowing where I was going to go in terms of graphic design and within the industry, like more broadly. Didn't really know what I wanted to focus on. I just was excited to do things in general. Doing a lot of more traditional graphic design work as well, and hand-drawn illustrations as part of like identity toolkits and little illustration gigs every now and then, just being very crafty and just doing like little bits and bobs wherever I could find work, really. And then eventually I found myself in this kind of situation where I was maybe coming on to like 3 years in Montreal, freelancing, doing like work with the collective, and had like this lovely studio space with a bunch of friends, and I felt like extremely comfortable within like the Montreal design scene. And it was like a little bit of like a tricky kind of thought for me at the time, because I really, really, really loved like Montreal and really loved like the creative community. It's like an amazing, amazing, amazing city. And just like super supportive and extremely talented people just everywhere. It's a great place to be a creative. But I found myself in this place where at the time in like the early 2010s, studios didn't really work with clients outside of Montreal. It was like if you're like a design studio in Montreal, you'd work with big like Quebecois clients, or big like maybe at most like Canadian clients, but it was you never really see like design studios working with big international brands or like big American brands or big European brands or whatever it is. So I wanted to kind of see how people communicated design and spoke about design and approached design, and practice design like outside of my little microcosm. And I just wanted to be part of like more of like an international like discourse. So I traveled around, and eventually ended up getting an offer for a role at a studio called Character in San Francisco, which is a branding and design agency, or was a branding and design agency at the time. They closed down like a couple of years ago after selling to a larger agency group. But at the time, they were doing really exciting work in Silicon Valley and California and just like the States more broadly. And I thought it was just kind of an interesting opportunity for myself to kind of learn new things, live somewhere different for the first time, and just kind of, yeah, learn what graphic design meant outside of Montreal. So I left the city, moved to San Francisco with nothing but like my suitcase and my cat Ambro, who's still with me in the other room. Um, uh, but yeah, just kind of went on a whim, didn't really know anyone at all in California. And I'm like a pretty introverted person as well. So, it was like a very big move for me to just kind of like show up somewhere new and not being the sort of person who just kind of like picks up friends like on the street sort of naturally. But I joined the studio and had an incredible time. Like to this day, it's uh, like definitely one of the best like roles I've genuinely like ever had. Like it's still a role model for me in terms of studio culture. Like people there were just really nice and really cared about the work that they were doing. And it, yeah, just had this really great kind of like work-life balance. There was like a strong sense of like camaraderie, but it, yeah, wasn't too, also wasn't too like intense all or nothing. Like it just felt like it struck all the right balances from my perspective. And I think it was there that I fell in love with kind of brand identity work as like an idea. Because at that point, I, was a few years into graphic design and like I still didn't even really know what that meant. It was like, I called myself a graphic designer, but I was like making things out of paper. I was like illustrating, I was shooting things. I was, just kind of tackling whatever came my way. And kind of deep down, I think I had this like desire up until this point to focus in on some craft and get really, really good at it. Like I kind of really admired the, designers like who I mentioned before, like Julien Vallée or like Karim Zarifa, who would craft these really kind of like specific styles and they were known for specific things and they were kind of designers as artists sort of a thing or artists as designers. And I thought that that was kind of, what a graphic designer ends up leading to the more kind of you progress. But once I kind of discovered this world of like brand identity design, visual identity, I realized that like this kind of restlessness that I've always kind of juggled with internally of never being able to like fully pick a lane and being a little bit too kind of all over the place in terms of my interests. And I'm always kind of curious to, work with different types of people and different types of demographics and collaborate with people of completely different backgrounds. And diversity is always like a great thing. And I just want to kind of continuously explore and indulge and learn. And brand identity was like the perfect place to accept being like a generalist and kind of try to better understand, okay, if I am like a generalist, like what does that mean? Because it doesn't mean like you're not good at, anything specific. It means that you have like a different type of skill set, which is more so that of like a art director, of a curator, of working with, great specialists. Um, yeah, so it was a really big kind of turning point for me. And the first big project that I worked on over there was for San Francisco Design Week, where we, like as a studio, we were commissioned to do a campaign identity, annual identity for San Francisco Design Week. And I was still making everything all the time. So that's exactly where my mind went initially. And I was like, oh, let's solve it with like an installation and we'll photograph it. But I had this idea to convey this idea of like looking closer, which was the theme of that year. The fact that like design is something that is like seamless and inherent within, a city's fabric, within San Francisco's fabric, and identity. And it's something that we just like never really notice in our day-to-day. But of course, there's all that kind of thinking and structure and process that kind of lives behind it. And we came up with this idea to create these structures, which is crazy now. I feel like today we'd absolutely do this in 3D, but at the time we actually built these things, these like life-size structures that were like these wooden ornamentures, all like CNC'd and cut out, and then covered the front surfaces of them with like a mirrored surface, and then placed them throughout the city and photographed them. So there's this contrast between like an invisible seamlessness. The letter forms would kind of blend into the background. And you'd always have this kind of like slight peak at the complexities that kind of sat behind these invisible structures, basically. And then after creating those kind of campaign images and rolling that online and print and etc., we also brought them to the festival itself, so people could kind of experience them from a environmental perspective as well. And yeah, did a bunch of the collateral, kind of contrasted a bunch of the imagery with like a really poppy, vibrant orange. A lot of the ornamentures on the wooden frameworks were kind of inspired by the Golden Gate Bridge, so we had a lot of kind of tie backs to the orange from the bridge as well, and things along those lines. Um, and another project that I worked on at Character was for a brand called Plume. I think that this was like the first brand identity project that actually felt like a full brand identity project that I worked on. I think when I was in Montreal, I was like, I take on brand identity projects, but it was like a, you know, a small like a clothing store that needed a logo in 3 weeks sort of a thing. It wasn't actually like a fully fledged like 360 identity toolkit in an agency setting with a proper budget and team and all that sort of stuff. And this was a brand that came to Character, who had this technology for basically these pods that you plug in throughout your home that give you better internet, with like a smart kind of Wi-Fi mesh network. And we got to collaborate with a really lovely product design firm to actually develop the hardware alongside the concept, alongside like a naming studio to come up with a name and really approach things holistically, which is super, super exciting. And I guess overall, kind of big picture with this project, the whole kind of strategic approach was based on the fact that I think Google just did its rebrand to the current, you know, Google look and feel of today, with like the friendly sans serif, and it like early 2010s. I think that as like a movement was just starting to kind of like gain face. And we thought that there was like a really big opportunity to kind of like counter that super friendly tech Silicon Valley aesthetic, with something unexpected within the tech space. Like if we're moving beyond the world of like B2B tech branding and we're becoming more like B2C, there are many different ways of being B2C. So what are other ways of thinking about tech? So the kind of thinking at the time was to think of it more so as like a home good. These are physical products that live in your home. So how can we draw inspiration from furniture brands of the time and kind of the sort of material qualities and material languages and color palettes and tonalities that we associate with the home more broadly. So yeah, I got to work on a really lovely like packaging project with lovely felt interiors and create like these little lovely little jewel boxes for the pods, and collaborate with this fantastic 3D and motion studio called 6 and 5, which at the time were just like two guys in they were in South America. They hadn't moved out to Europe just yet, and they were yeah, we collaborated with them to put together a series of visuals for the website, which kind of worked on a scroll, and kind of brought to life these pods to tell different narratives, and worked on little photo art direction, product shots and things along these lines as well. But it was super fun, and I just kind of like learned a lot, and I got even more excited about the idea of like holistic projects, collaborating with a bunch of really talented people, and putting all of like the puzzle pieces together to convey like a brand story. Which led me to, I guess this was like 2015, 2016, a couple of years into San Francisco. I found myself in a position where I knew that I didn't want to live in San Francisco forever. I mean, lovely city, working with amazing people, all that stuff, but it was, yeah, just not really my city. I didn't really kind of imagine myself like living in the States forever. And San Francisco is such a specific thing, and I wanted to live in a more kind of diverse kind of environment to continue learning, continue exploring, and continue kind of understanding myself and bettering my practice and things along these lines. So I traveled out to Europe, did a bunch of kind of little things here and there, met a bunch of interesting people, was actually invited to like those talking robots that I showed at the beginning of this presentation. They were featured on like It's Nice That while I was living in San Francisco. And then someone in Copenhagen saw them and was like, hey, do you want to feature do you want to show your robots at this like art festival in Copenhagen? I was like, sure, I've never been to Europe before, but that sounds like amazing. Like, let's go for it. And we flew out, showed off like these robots at this like arts festival, and then kind of traveled around Europe, meeting with different design studios and kind of plotting like I guess my next career move at the time, which ended up being taking on a role at a studio called ManvsMachine, based in London. Um, uh, they like Mike Alderson, the founder of ManvsMachine or co-founder of ManvsMachine, contacted me when I was living in San Francisco, and he was saying that he was just about to open up a Los Angeles office. They were just about to kind of like open up their second studio, and he was looking for like people to fill out the London team, and then also looking for people for the LA team. And I knew that I wanted to probably move to Europe, so I just kind of seized the opportunity and spent most of my time in Norway Wharf, which is where they're based out in Haggerston, out in East London. And working at ManvsMachine was like amazing on so many levels. I feel like it was there where I really got to learn how to be a better kind of like art director, but also like a better manager and collaborator. Uh, Basically, no one on the team was came from a design background. Everyone had either like a very technical background or were like a 3D or motion generalist, but no one really came from like a kind of place where like design thinking or kind of like conceptual or strategic approaches or like graphic design that's more traditional senses was kind of like the starting point. It was always kind of like tech first or like look first, rather than kind of concept or strategy first. So I felt like I could kind of come in, learn art direction, but also like be in the right position to be able to have a lot more autonomy than I probably would as an art director or senior designer in a branding agency. Because like as the one graphic designer, I could just design everything basically. And whenever there was something that I couldn't design, or if it was a larger workload, I was able to kind of like bring in more freelancers, and eventually take on the role of like design director and kind of oversee more of ManvsMachine's kind of identity work, campaign identity work, anything that kind of fell within the broad spectrum of, I guess, visual narratives. Um, my first big project at ManvsMachine, which was like a really big kind of turning point and flagship project for me at the time, was Nike Air Max Day 2017. Again, as like the only graphic designer on the team, I just got to do everything, which was amazing for me. And I just got to kind of like explore and play around. And that year was the third year that Nike was working with ManvsMachine for their annual Air Max Day campaign. But I think it was the 20th or 30th. It was many, many years that Air Max Day had been around. And they wanted to kind of celebrate that legacy. So instead of having like a bespoke logo type and very distinct look and feel for that year's kind of line of Air Max products, they wanted to do a bunch of re-releases and kind of remixes of previous years. And I thought that that was like a perfect opportunity from like an identity toolkit perspective to establish a more flexible system that could kind of reskin itself, and be able to take on different looks of different eras and pair itself with different kind of product worlds. So the beginning of the concept was let's make just like a flexible type kit that can work in 2D and work in 3D, and feel like Nike's Futura condensed extra bold, but puffed up with a little bit of air. And got to collaborate with insanely talented people. It was such a luxury to be sitting next to all these amazing kind of like 3D artists and be able to kind of like bounce back and forth like, oh, hey, here's my sketch for an A. How does this work? And they'll be like, oh yeah, I mean, great in 2D, but in 3D, the curves don't really work that right. Like, how do we approach this? We'd pass things back and forth just like throughout the day and find something that was kind of universal enough to meet our various kind of creative needs, and kind of drop them into sketches, drop them into environments, and start to see how that felt, and start to be able to build out these product worlds. So from an art direction perspective, was kind of working on kind of material stories and being able to make sure that our scenes really resonated with kind of sneakerheads who were really, really knowledgeable about kind of like the backstories of the particular kind of Air Max bubble on one particular line from like the early 1990s. Like everyone knew these really kind of like cult stories around each of these different products. So we were able to get really, really specific with our storytelling and kind of integrate all these little Easter eggs throughout, which is quite fun. And once we established these various worlds, we had this lovely flexible system that could take on the visual language of those worlds as well to be able to kind of like roll out a flexible system that had that kind of overarching identity tied together by the Air Max type, but was also able to kind of reskin itself to echo each of those various eras and products. And then once we brought that to life in motion, things started to just come to life much more, and we were able to use that kind of like framework and like kit of parts, both in terms of product kind of worlds and material palettes and color palettes and our flexible type system to be able to inform like all of our TV spots and various breakdowns of the actual videos and motion pieces that we put together. Also worked a lot in kind of like live action art direction. Up until that point, my only art direction was there's like letter forms in San Francisco and really DIY stuff back home in Montreal. And then suddenly I found myself at ManvsMachine, like literally renting out Warner Brothers studios for a few days and having entire warehouses with, 100 people kind of working on set to build things physically. Like these three overhead shots were actual overhead shots that were all sitting next to each other within the same warehouse. It was absolutely wild. So yeah, got to work on a bunch of live action art direction and kind of put together pieces that kind of wove together live action and 3D and kind of think about it all holistically. And on my end, it was just such a great learning experience to better understand each of those workflows and to learn how to collaborate with these people better. And yeah, small offshoot of that as well, doing a lot of like little smaller projects with ManvsMachine alongside those kind of like larger ones, a lot of still life art direction, just kind of working with 3D artists in the team to kind of tell stories and put together little campaigns for some of our clients. This one being a campaign for Squarespace as well. More Nike, did a few Nike Air Max Day campaigns over the years. And this one was much more kind of referencing like 90s aesthetics of a bunch of re-releases of some trainers at the time. Yeah, just super fun. Just a lot of kind of scene building and product world building and putting together like a kit of parts for that particular campaign. And I think by that point, we had like such a good relationship with the Nike global team that it was such like an explorative kind of fun process where we could just kind of like really riff off each other's ideas and build things out and approach the work quite organically, which was a lot of fun. And always just like so exciting to work with really big clients on such creative work because, you end up seeing it rolled out just kind of globally by like implementation teams like around the world after the fact, which is always very crazy to think about. And then 2018, found myself in a place where I was with ManvsMachine for 2 years. And I was having a great time doing really nice work that I was very excited about with really lovely coworkers. Everything was great. But I also knew that my niche within ManvsMachine was like so specific. I was like a designer in a 3D context, and I could just keep getting better at that if I stayed there, basically. And I knew that, if I stayed at ManvsMachine, I would kind of climb up to more kind of directorial roles, sure, but I wouldn't be able to kind of like better my craft because I didn't really have any mentors above me who walked like similar journeys or had backgrounds within kind of strategic design, graphic design, visual identity, more kind of like holistic approaches beyond motion art direction. So I was like, hey, I'm in London. This is one of the creative capitals of the world. I should go freelance and just meet people, collaborate, really put myself out there and just kind of try what I did in Montreal, but with all this new experience that I have in an entirely new city. So I went freelance and then spent a lot of time freelancing with agencies and design studios across London, meeting really lovely people, also spending time kind of traveling around a little bit. Moved out to Copenhagen because I fell in love with it the first time that I showed off those robots at that festival, and met a bunch of really lovely people and wanted to go back. So my partner and I went out there and rented a place for close to a year and just freelanced. And after that, also hopped around more, just kind of traveling around. Went to Cupertino to work from Apple's like global headquarters for a few months as well, just kind of like freelancing and enjoying the freelance life. Um, just a couple of projects that I worked on over the course of that time, like a lot of work with Space 10. Turns out that the people who ran that festival with where I showed the robots in Copenhagen, they it was the last year that they were holding that festival. It was called Trailer Park IO. They had like a bunch of trailers set up and they talk about tech and art. It was very cool. And it was their last year, but they had this idea to collaborate with IKEA on like a future living like innovation lab. And they're like, oh yeah, we're starting this new thing. It's going to be called Space 10. We have a lot of like big ideas for it. It's going to be great, et cetera, et cetera. So then when I came back to Copenhagen, Space 10 was like up and running a whole thing. And I got to collaborate with them much, much more. And yeah, just felt like I was at the right place at the right time to meet all these really talented, lovely people to collaborate with. So worked on a bunch of different things. This was part of like I guess like a identity asset kit for a bunch of research publications that they were putting together, but it also kind of flexed across a bunch of their social touch points and web. Also took on a social kind of identity system for them and like motion system. Just like mini little identity toolkits that they'd be able to kind of implement, but still collaborating with friends along the way. Like some of these pieces, we're actually working with Man versus Machine again to put together like a 3D animation video capsules for a series of everyday experiments that they were putting out as like a self-initiated kind of research project. Um, Packaging projects, some labels I did for a wine label out in Napa Valley, friends of friends back in California for my time out there, uh, putting together a little label set where basically it's just echoing the effect that you get when you look out at the Napa Valleys and you have this very kind of like distinct look and feel of the mist kind of gently silhouetting the tops of the hills. Worked a lot in publication. This one being a publication project for a friend, an artist from China living out in Berlin, working on a publication project to just kind of document an ongoing project of hers where she was collaborating with and telling the story of this Oriental silk importer in Los Angeles, which is a fun little book project. Some work with Google Creative Lab. I freelanced with them for a little while. Really, really lovely bunch. And one of the projects that I worked on over there was this print piece for it was like a part of their digital well-being experiments initiative, where they had a series of workshops and they needed to have some sort of physical manifestation of digital well-being workshop in print, some sort of package that people could open up as a team and kind of sift through and kind of be able to hold the workshop together in small groups. So just a lovely little sprint of a print packaging project. A lot of like independent projects as well. Another one for a client back home in Montreal, like a real estate developer. Collaborated with a lovely illustrator originally from Montreal, now living in London, Nicolas Menor. And yeah, just putting together little identity toolkit systems, restaurant project. Actually, shout out to them because they just got their first Michelin star, I think last week. Like amazing, amazing, amazing talent. Like the guy who runs this, Daniel and his team, are just like such a thoughtful bunch back home in Canada, out in the Niagara region. They have like a full-time forager, just kind of, they have their own gardens. They're like really just kind of like working with the land and doing a lot of really innovative stuff. And I worked with them on their kind of identity toolkit. And then they opened up a bakehouse, worked with them on a rollout of their bakehouse's toolkit and packaging for like coffee, bread bags, coffee cups, etc. More print kind of publication projects along the way, just kind of having a lot of fun, enjoying the freelance life over those few years. Which then led me to this slide, which, whenever anyone talks about Apple, it's either just like an Apple logo or some sort of like blurry background, which I get. But yeah, since I was freelancing with them a little bit during that time, and I did kind of like a sprint with them, and I had some friends working there from my time in California. When lockdown hit, and my partner and I, we were back in London at the time, and then COVID hit, and we're like, what is work? What is design? Like, what is life? What do we do? Um, and we're just kind of like at home all the time. And I wanted to find some sort of setup that I could like stick with longer term. And ended up reaching out to some friends over at Apple's like global design team and started collaborating with them remotely. And I worked with them for a really long time. I'd say like my longest kind of freelance stint with anyone really. It must have been almost 2 years or like a year and a half. It was basically all of lockdown, and then after that, as I kind of slowly emerged back into the real world. Um, and then after that kind of really long period, I felt like I was very, very comfortable with this setup where I was freelancing for a team who's out in California. So I'd check in with them for like an hour at the end of my day in London and then kind of pass things along. But I was just working by myself really. And I really missed working with kind of collaborators and friends and just having like the day-to-day kind of like social aspects of like working in the studio. And I think at that point as well, I definitely want to go back to kind of like the agency side of things. I felt like after a year and a half, you know, all in within in-house environment, I really wanted to kind of like get back out there and be more kind of creative and explore outside of the confines of a particular brand. So took some time off again, traveled around, went meeting with different studios and trying to see, yeah, like what will I do next? I had, in the back of my mind for a while, I thought, oh, maybe I'll start my own studio. I think after COVID, I felt like that's not what I wanted. I'd like after a couple of years of working by myself for Apple, like in like a room. I didn't want to be starting up like a studio and again, kind of being by myself in a room until that studio found itself, hopefully maybe successful one day. So I thought that I knew that I want to kind of like join a studio or join an agency, kind of be involved in another team. And after kind of traveling around and meeting different agencies, I ended up joining this lovely bunch out in Stockholm. So now I spend most of my time kind of back and forth between London and Stockholm, working with this agency for coming on to like a year now, a branding and design studio that's based across Stockholm, Copenhagen, and Oslo, called Bold Scandinavia. Wish that I had work to share here, but unfortunately haven't cased any of the projects that I've worked on so far. So this is still a little bit of a TBD. But that's basically where I'm at today. And yeah, I think for the foreseeable future as well, just kind of continuing to explore what my role is over Bold Scandinavia. I'm part of the creative leadership team over there, working as a design director, and everyone is just fantastic, super talented, and just like a really friendly bunch. And I love also being able to kind of still have a little bit of like a foothold within the Nordics is super nice as well after having fallen in love with Copenhagen during my time there as well. I mean, Stockholm is very different from Copenhagen, but still the North more broadly. Um, but yeah, that's that's where I'm at. That's where I'm at now.